My name is Chuck, and I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley in 2016. College life was a dream for me. I joined a frat, balanced my studies effortlessly, and even made time for chasing girls. To this day, I'm still close with many of my old frat brothers. And guess what? I recently got engaged to my fiancée, Rosie, who I also met at Berkeley. But let me tell you, if you had asked me how I felt about Berkeley as a freshman, my response would have been completely different. What I'm about to share is one of the big reasons I wasn't exactly a go-getter in high school. The vibe at Berkeley was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It was almost overwhelming to be surrounded by so many so-called high achievers. As a clueless freshman, I quickly got caught up in the whirlwind of career goals and planning the next 30 years of your life. All at just 18 years old. Ridiculous, right? But that's just how things worked at my school. If you wanted to make it in the business world, you had to have a polished LinkedIn profile. It was practically non-negotiable. I can still feel the pressure of building a professional image online, as though my entire future depended on which people I connected with and which skills I listed. But I did what I had to do. I checked every box and dove into the search for a summer internship. It didn't take long before my inbox lit up with a real message. To my shock, a well-known business firm had contacted me, showing interest in my profile. And this wasn't just another generic bot message either. The content of the message made it clear that it was crafted just for me. I read that message at least 6 times before I finally hit reply. After a day and a few quick exchanges, I got the invite for a first-round interview. I spent hours diving into research, trying to get a feel for the company and what might come up during the interview. I even prepped for every sample question I could dig up. Then I got a message from a guy named Armin Slowinski. I'll never forget that name, ever. He said he'd be the one interviewing me. Of course, the first thing I did was stalk him online, but soon my excitement turned to confusion. I searched for Armin on LinkedIn, thinking I'd find some clues about the guy I was about to meet. But to my surprise, nothing. No profile, no social media, nothing at all. I figured he might just be one of those people who values their privacy, so I brushed it off. Armin and I locked in a date and time, and he sent me the interview location. I pulled it up on my phone and realized, wait a minute, it was a random coffee shop in Oakland. This is when things started feeling off. Why wasn't the interview happening in Berkeley? We had tons of coffee shops and perfect spots for interviews right in our college town. It left me scratching my head. Still, the address seemed normal enough online, so I decided not to overthink it. The day before the interview, I told my buddy Riley about it. He was even more freaked out than I was and said the whole thing seemed shady. I agreed, but I figured the opportunity was worth the risk. He asked how I was getting there, and I told him I was taking an Uber. Without hesitation, he offered to drive me himself since he had nothing else going on. I thanked him and gladly accepted his offer. Little did I know, I might not even be telling you this story today if he hadn't insisted on driving me. It was 4 p.m. the next day when Riley pulled up to my dorm. Honestly, I was a bundle of nerves. This was one of my first real interviews. I jumped into the car and off we went. About 20 minutes into the drive, I asked Riley to drop me off on the street. I didn't want to risk anyone seeing my friend drop me off for an interview. I thanked him again, and he offered to wait for me. I asked if he was sure, and with a smirk, he pulled out a massive bag of weed from his dashboard. I couldn't help but laugh, then I slammed the door shut. I walked for a few minutes, then stopped dead in my tracks. I looked up and stared at what could only be described as a construction site. There was no coffee shop in sight. Even stranger, the whole area was far from residential. All the buildings looked shut down or totally private. Totally thrown off, I double-checked my phone and made sure I was in the right place. It hit me. This block must have been torn down recently. Like so recently that even Google Maps hadn't caught up yet. I reached for my phone to call Riley, but before I could dial, a loud voice boomed behind me. "Chuck," a deep voice bellowed. I spun around and there he was, an insanely tall guy in a sleek black suit that screamed expensive. Thank God, I thought. relieved that this whole situation wasn't some kind of setup. His presence was intense, almost too intense, considering the rundown surroundings. Oh, and let's not forget the car he was leaning against, a matte black Bentley. He walked toward me with a puzzled expression. We shook hands, and when I brought up the construction site, he seemed just as shocked as I was. He frowned and rubbed his chin. "You know what? Let's just find somewhere else," he said, gesturing toward the Bentley. "Get in." He turned and headed back to the car, calling over his shoulder, "Shotgun's all yours." Without another word, he hopped into the front seat and slammed the door shut. I eagerly followed him, taking a moment to circle the car just to take it all in. As I walked past, my eyes couldn't resist a quick glance into the back seat. I expected to see those luxurious leather seats you'd expect in a Bentley, but what I saw instead froze me in my tracks. Lying flat on the floor, hidden in the shadows, was a man. In his hand, he gripped something long and metallic. A wave of panic hit me hard, and my mind raced with horrifying thoughts. This was a trap. Without a second thought, I turned and sprinted away with every ounce of speed I could muster. I heard the man shout my name from behind, but I didn't dare look back. As I ran, I heard the sound I feared the most, screeching tires. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder and saw the car swerving, heading straight for me. I had to think fast. There was no way I could outrun a car. Escape wasn't even an option. There was no open space, just a labyrinth of streets closing in on me. I reached the next intersection and faced with a choice that could decide everything, left or right. My gut said left. It was the quicker route. But my feet didn't listen. Before my brain could catch up, I found myself running to the right, darting down the road. I knew time was running out. 10, maybe 20 seconds tops. By some miracle, one of the buildings ahead had a fire escape, and it looked low enough for me to grab onto. With every ounce of strength I could summon, I leaped up, my hands catching the ladder. I'd never done a pull-up in my life, but this wasn't just any moment. It was life or death. I scrambled up the ladder and kept climbing, desperate to get higher. The Bentley screeched around the corner and slammed to a stop in front of the building. I couldn't see the driver, but I felt his eyes locked on me. There was nothing more I could do. If they chose to follow me up, I'd have no choice but to fight. The next minute felt like an eternity. The car sat there for what seemed like ages before it finally revved up and sped down the street, turning left and disappearing from sight. I could hardly breathe. I pulled out my phone and called Riley, practically screaming into it, telling him everything that had just gone down. I stayed on that fire escape, heart racing, until Riley finally found me. I jumped into the car and we took off in complete silence. The aftermath of the whole ordeal was oddly quiet. I shoved it to the back of my mind and refused to talk about it, not even with Riley. To me, it was like it never happened. But no matter how hard I try to forget, there are moments, like right now, when every terrifying detail comes flooding back, reminding me of how close I was to what could have been the last day of my life.
This happened not too long ago. My family and I were heading to college to help me move in since I'm a first-year student. When we arrived, I found out I'd be living in a Jack and Jill setup, basically 2 rooms sharing the same bathroom. So, I'd be living with 3 other guys. I already knew one of them from orientation. We hit it off and got to know each other. His roommate isn't really relevant to this story, though. What matters is my roommate, Diora, and that's who I'm going to tell you about. Before moving in, I got Diora's socials, and we exchanged info. I tried chatting with him on Instagram to get to know him better, but his replies were short and boring. To make it worse, his profile had that typical Discord mod vibe you see on Instagram Reels or TikTok. When we finally moved in, I met him in person, and, ironically, he looked exactly like a Discord mod, except he had a skinny build and was about my height. He was super pale and had a peach fuzz mustache. I tried striking up another conversation, but his style was just like his texts, dry, introverted, and awkward. He stuttered a lot and always seemed to rush to end the conversation as fast as he could. I tried to break the ice by asking what kind of music he listens to, but he just said he doesn't listen to music because it wouldn't fill his cup of emptiness. Things took a turn for the weird when he set up his PS5. It wasn't the gaming itself that was strange, but what he did while gaming. Diora made these odd grunting noises, shook his body violently, and laughed while furiously spamming the controller. He even tucked his feet inside the desk cabinet and occasionally yanked them toward his body during his shaking fits. He'd whisper to himself while playing, whether he was alone or with his online friends, and often repeated what he whispered twice, giggling after each phrase. He stayed locked in the room 24/7, barely ever doing any homework. His movements alone were enough to freak me out while I tried to sleep. But that's not even the strangest part. Around the first week of living together, I went out with some friends I'd met in the dorm and came back pretty late, around 1 a.m. Diora seemed to be asleep in his bed, so I thought nothing of it. As I walked to my cabinet, which was right next to my bed, I suddenly felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned around and found Diora staring at me. A weird, unsettling grin stretched across his face. Startled, I jumped and blurted out, "Holy Diora, why are you staring at me like that?" He just laughed and casually muttered, "Dark time," before turning to face the wall. That weirdness stuck with me, and it happened 3 more times over the next few weeks. I tried to move out, but the college told me there were no open dorms. I even tried swapping rooms with one of the other guys, but one of the roommates wasn't interested, so I was stuck with Diora for the rest of the semester. About 3 months later, I came back from my English class and opened the door to the dorm. Diora jumped up in a panic and asked why I was back so early. This was odd, especially since my class actually ran late, so I was back later than usual. I asked him if he needed the room to himself, but he just shook his head. Then, in the weirdest anime-like pose, he said, "You shouldn't be worried at all." I couldn't help but cringe. His words only made me feel more uneasy. That's when I noticed a box on his desk. When I asked about it, he casually said it wasn't important. I shrugged it off, but soon realized my iPhone charger and scissors were missing. I asked Diora if he'd seen them, and he admitted he had them. He handed me the scissors, and as he passed me the charger, the box tipped over. The box popped open, and my heart dropped when I saw what was inside. A sticky note with my name on it slipped out, along with a clear case holding eyelashes, a pair of glasses, one of my socks, and a disposable photo of me, one I had taken as a joke. Diora scrambled to gather everything, mumbling some explanation, but I shouted at him to get out. He bolted, not wasting any time. I texted my RA, telling him what happened, and he told me to show him the box as proof so they'd have a reason to kick Diora out. I shoved the box into my laundry bin, feeling sick and shaken by everything I'd just seen. An hour later, Diora came back. I told him to stay on his side of the room and not speak to me. After that, neither of us said a word. I tried staying awake to make sure he wouldn't find the box, but it had been a long day and I finally drifted off around 2 a.m. When I woke up, Diora was gone. Relieved, I went straight for my laundry bin, but the box was gone too. Panic set in. Just then, my RA knocked on the door. I told him everything that had happened, but without the box, he said there was nothing he could do. It would be my word against Diora's. 5 hours later, Diora returned. I confronted him about the box, but he acted clueless, insisting he had no idea what I was talking about. No matter how much I pressed, he just kept denying everything. I couldn't bear being in the same room with him anymore. Now, it's the 2nd semester, and unfortunately, I'm still stuck dorming with Diora. He promised he'd never do anything like that again, and said that if he did, he'd let me know so we could move out immediately. I took his word, but I still do my best to avoid the room whenever I can. Even now, I can't sleep or focus sometimes because my mind keeps going back to that box. Why did he take my photo? Why my socks? What was the point of the glasses? But what really sends chills down my spine? The eyelashes. What in the world were they doing there? The creepiest part? He'd labeled the box with my name.
It all went down during my freshman year in 2019, and I still think about it, especially around Halloween. It was the wildest time at my college. I went to a Big Ten school, and Halloween week meant non-stop parties. Fraternity costume bashes, bars forcing everyone to dress up, you name it. The whole scene was chaos, booze flowing, cops everywhere, and memories that still haunt me. This all went down on the Saturday of Halloween week. Our football team had just scored a massive win, and my friends and I were ready to party, big time. We were hitting up a specific off-campus fraternity bash thanks to my friend Alexandro, who was dating one of the players on the team. We showed up around 11 p.m. and let me tell you, it was the absolute madness. People were already getting trashed, chanting about the team we just demolished, while the music was blasting. I was taking shots, dancing with my crew, and living it up. Now, here's the thing. My phone had died, so I handed it over to Alexandro to stash in her purse for safekeeping. At one point, I told my friends I needed to hit the bathroom and asked them to wait by the DJ booth. By then, we were all pretty wasted. While I was in the bathroom, I suddenly heard someone scream, "Cops!" at the top of their lungs, and then pure chaos broke loose. People were screaming and rushing to get out of the house. I bolted out of there, only to be met with flashing police lights and a bunch of cop cars. It was like a scene from a movie. People were sprinting in every direction, some cops talking to the frat brothers, others chasing down underage drinkers. In my drunken haze, I suddenly realized I didn't have my phone. I started yelling for my friends while weaving through the cops. I couldn't find anyone in the madness, so I made the decision to head back to campus, even though I had no clue how to get there. This fraternity was way off campus, in some sketchy area I didn't know. It was freezing cold that night, around 37°F, and it was only October. Still buzzed, but trying to stay aware, I began my long, uncertain walk back. After walking for a while, I knew I needed to take a break to warm up and sober up. I spotted a building that looked like one of the academic halls and decided to duck inside. The place was dimly lit, with only a few faint exit signs glowing in the distance. After a few minutes, I started to feel warmer, but then it hit me. This wasn't an academic building at all. It was a warehouse. The creepy vibe started to freak me out, so I decided to bail. But when I went to the door, I came through. It was locked. My stomach dropped to my feet. How could it be locked from the inside? Panic hit me as I frantically searched for another way out. I spotted a door near one of the glowing exit signs, pushed it open, and stepped through, only to find myself in a completely different part of the building. This room was tiny, lit only by a faint red glow. A low buzzing noise came from some machine in the corner. Chains hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with steam. It felt like I'd stumbled into a scene straight out of a horror movie. I turned to leave, but the door behind me was locked too. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I sank down against the wall, silently sobbing. That's when I heard it, A door slamming shut, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. My body went stiff. Another door slammed, and the footsteps grew louder, heading straight for me. In a panic, I spotted another door beside me. I opened it as quietly as I could and slipped inside. This room was packed with hanging chains and thick steam. I tried to move as silently as possible, but I could hear the first door creaking open and the heavy footsteps getting closer. Entering the room, I had just fled. My fight or flight instinct took over. I spotted a window across the room and bolted for it. With every ounce of strength, I kicked the glass 5 times before it finally shattered. That's when I heard the footsteps pick up speed. They were running straight for me. I had maybe 10 seconds. Without thinking, I jumped through the broken window, only realizing midair that the drop was much higher than I expected. I crashed about 10 feet down, landing on 2 recycling bins. The impact was brutal, but adrenaline kept me on my feet, pushing me forward. I forced myself up and glanced back at the broken window. No one was there, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out what would happen next. I sprinted to a cluster of pine trees nearby and crouched in the shadows. Peeking back at the window, I saw a figure standing there, scanning the area like they were hunting for me. My body froze, numb with fear. I couldn't waste any more time. Quietly, I slipped across the street and ran as fast and as far as I could, not stopping, until I finally recognized the side of campus where my dorm was. When I finally made it back, my friends were waiting outside, completely freaked out. They told me I'd been gone for almost 4 hours. The next day, I told them everything. Their jaws dropped as I described the creepy warehouse and the figure at the window. After talking it through, we realized that building had been abandoned for years. That familiar pit in my stomach came back. Whoever had been in there wasn't a cop, wasn't security. It was someone else entirely. To this day, I still have no clue who they were or what they were after. But one thing's for sure. If I hadn't stayed quiet, if I hadn't moved fast, I might not be here right now, telling this story. It's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and it'll haunt me forever.